Hi everyone, welcome back to Gavin Reads It All, and welcome to my very first episode of Gavin Reads All the King. This is going to be a brand new video series on my channel where I read every single book by Stephen King in publication order, with some exceptions, but I'm still going to get to everything eventually. For example, I won't be including the Dark Tower series in this video series. I will most likely do an entire video dedicated to reading the Dark Tower books for the first time. And the same with Gwendy's Button Box, I think it's called. I don't think I'm going to include that in this series either, but it's going to be a little bit of a while before I get to the Gwendy books anyway, so who knows, maybe by then I might actually cover them in this series. I will, however, be covering the Richard Bachman books, of which I think there are 8, and if any of my information is incorrect, please let me know in the comments. I got all my information from Wikipedia. I'm essentially going in the order that the Stephen King bibliography page on Wikipedia is telling me, so do shout at Wikipedia instead of me if any of this is wrong. So most of the books I'm reading for this series will be for the very first time. There are only 9 Stephen King books that I've read in the past. Those are Carrie, The Shining, The Stand, Cujo, Pet Sematary, Misery, Gerald's Game, Dolores Claiborne, and Rose Madder. But it has been a little bit of a while since I last read those books, so it's going to be like reading them for the first time, I promise. In every review in this video series will be spoiler filled, so there will be spoilers for all of the books, but they will also be timestamped, so if you do want to only watch a section for a book that you have read, you can click on that timestamp down below, and you can avoid all of the other books if you haven't read them just yet, and then come back to the video when you have. So each of the episodes in the series will cover 4 books from Stephen King, and every 6th video will be the collections. So just as an example, I put the graphic on the screen here for what you can expect in the first 6 episodes of Gavin Reads All the King. So the Bachman books will be included with those other Stephen King books, and then in the 6th episode I'm going to be doing the collections. And this is all until I've caught up, which might take a few years. I'm so excited to get started because I have been in a Stephen King mood for months now, and I really just want to get stuck in. And if you do end up liking this video, please do give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and talk all things Stephen King to me in the comments. So in this very first video I will be covering these 4 books that Stephen King first published as himself and Richard Bachman. I know these aren't necessarily in the order that he wrote them, but just in the order that he published them. So first I will be rereading Carrie. This was the very first Stephen King book I ever read, so my memory on this is very, very foggy, and a lot of the movie adaptations are clouding my judgment on these books too. I can't remember if I really loved it or didn't like it. I really do love some of the Stephen King adaptations, of which I do have on my back here. I'm hoping to also watch some of the movie adaptations as I'm going through these books too. And from what I remember, I do enjoy the original Carrie movie, but this vlog series is all about the books, okay? All about the books. So I'm excited to get back into this since this was my first King and I can barely remember it at this point. And then next I will read Salem Slot, which I haven't read yet. Very, very excited to, because I hear it might be about vampires or it has some kind of vampiric elements to it. Have no idea, so I'm ready to get stuck in. Never seen an adaptation of it either, so I'm going in completely blind on that one. Then I have The Shining, which I have again also read before, but my memory on it is so foggy, and I think it's getting mixed up with the movie, of which I do like. I do like the movie. I know sometimes that can be a bit of an unpopular opinion, but I do really enjoy the movie. And R.I.P. Shelley Duvall, she only just passed away a couple of days ago, so that to me is even more reason to rewatch the movie alongside reading this. And then finally I will be reading Rage, which is part of this Bachman books bind up. This was a little bit hard to get hold of. I did manage to find a cheap version on eBay, so I thrifted this one because a lot of the other bind ups didn't include Rage. I know why, and I will probably talk about that while I'm reading this book, and I kind of find the context around Rage quite fascinating, so I think this will be so interesting to read later on. But yeah, Rage will be the final book that I read, which Stephen King did publish under Richard Bachman. Okay, there we have it. These are the 4 books I'm going to read. I had better get started. Can you imagine having your very first book being published and it's Carrie? You know what I mean? It's like, even if this isn't one of your favourite Stephen King books ever, you kind of have to give it so much credit for the ingenuity of the plot, the mixed media format of it too, which just added so many more elements to this story that I think the films don't really quite portray. I forgot about all of the scholarly articles that were included in this, some segments of autobiographies and newspapers and all of that. It's just so brilliant the way that this story is kind of built up, and the little droppings of suspense that you get, like little foreshadowings. And if I'd never watched the film before reading the book the first time in 2018, this would have had me by the throat. And to be fair to this book, it still had me by by the throat. It's written so well. Not Stephen King's best by any means, but still written so very well that you just have to give it so much credit for what it does. So Carrie is about a young girl called Carrie White, or Carrietta White, and she lives with her mother Margaret, and Margaret is extremely religious and rather abusive, and she's kind of shielded Carrie from so many of the actual real life things in the world, especially things to do with Carrie's body. So at the start of the story we do have Carrie, she's in the shower with her schoolmates, her classmates, and she has her first period, and she is humiliated by everyone, and she is severely picked on and bullied, and she also discovers that she has telekinesis, a power that allows you to move objects with your mind, and the telekinesis just builds and builds and builds in Carrie with the backdrop of bullying and abuse and everything else in between, that it just kind of explodes at a certain point in the story towards the end. And obviously this will be filled with spoilers, so I'm just going to tell you everything, but I feel like Carrie is so iconic that everybody pretty much knows what happens to Carrie and what happens on prom night, whether or not you've read the book or seen the films. You know that she will get dunked with pig's blood in front of everyone after being announced as prom queen, and that inspires a rampage, a bloody massacre on prom night. So that itself is quite an exciting and action-packed premise, but you don't really get a whole lot of action until like part 2, when all hell breaks loose essentially, and it is that kind of slow build up to those events that really carries this book through. Like for instance, on page 10 you get the first mention of surviving classmates. So this is at the very start of the story, you don't really know what's going on, and in one of these scholarly articles in a book called The Shadow Exploded, you hear about Carrie White, and you're like, okay, why are they making books about Carrie White? Why are they making books about this young girl who is bullied by everyone? You look at her and you don't see anything too remarkable. She is described as a chunky girl with pimples on her neck and back and buttocks, her wet hair completely without colour, and then you're like, okay, so what is it about Carrie that's now inspired a book? Oh, is it because of her telekinesis? Okay, cool, but why surviving classmates, you know? Like, you have to sort of follow the clues, and you kind of have this sinking sense of dread as the book goes on that something really devastating happened. And considering Carrie is essentially our protagonist, she is the person we're following and we feel sorry for her, you have the kind of sense of dread that maybe Carrie dies and, you know, she's being severely bullied and there's like this conspiracy and some of her classmates are about to dump pig's blood on her and stuff like that, and you think, oh, okay, like, is something going to happen to Carrie? Like, you're kind of worried the entire time about Carrie, that something's going to happen to Carrie. And then you get surviving classmates and like, okay, so this is something that affects a lot more people than just Carrie. And despite knowing that Carrie is the one who commits this atrocity, I still read this hoping for a different outcome for Carrie, because this entire time you feel nothing but sympathy and empathy towards somebody who is so badly bullied that as soon as somebody approaches her to ask, like when Tommy goes to her and asks her to prom, he approaches her and before he even says anything or does anything really, she flinches. Like, that's her automatic reaction. She's been that badly bullied and abused that even just like an innocent approach to her causes her so much fear and panic. And that is heartbreaking. That is so heartbreaking. And I feel like a lot of us, including myself, we were pretty badly bullied at school. And so I get those feelings. I get the feeling of anxiety that around any corner somebody could just like punch me in the face or like kick me or do anything they wanted to me. And Carrie reminds me of this poor girl who used to go to my school. I'll not say her name, but nearly everyone bullied her. Nearly everyone bullied her. And I remember hearing about when she was walking home one day and somebody else was walking behind her, this girl came up to her and just started attacking her just because she was there for absolutely no reason either. You know, it's heartbreaking because stories like that do exist and you are always so empathetic towards those being bullied. It's heartbreaking and you do want someone to step in, you do want someone to intervene. And so this entire time you're feeling all of these awful things for Carrie. Her mother is awful. Mama was the minister, Carrie the congregation, services lasted from 2 to 3 hours. And Carrie is like, why did everyone laugh at me? You didn't tell me about menstruation and stuff like that. And Mama had been walking toward her and now her hand flashed with sudden limber speed, a hard hand. It struck her backhand across the jaw and Carrie fell down in the doorway. And Eve was weak and say it, woman, say it. No, Mama, please help me, the foot swung. Carrie screamed. Like, it's awful. It is so awful. You are on the side of Carrie for the majority of this book. You want her to overcome her mother's abuse. You want her to overcome the abuse of her peers. But then you know exactly what happens and what Carrie does to retaliate. And then you're like, okay, maybe that's just a little bit too much, Carrie. That's a little bit too much. And then you're kind of questioning yourself as a reader because you kind of wanted them to be taught a lesson, as Carrie says before she does what she does. Like, you kind of want them to know what it feels like to be bullied. You kind of want them to feel sorry and to repent for what they've done. But it goes in a totally different direction. And then you have to question, like, who is to blame? Who is to blame? Because Carrie, you know, she acts like so childlike and naive for a lot of this book. Whenever Des Jordan, you know, tells her about menstruation, she's covering her ears and she's crying and she doesn't want to hear it. And even when she's locked everyone in the gymnasium and she sees someone gets electrocuted and he looked funny, she began to laugh. By Christ, then let them all look funny. You know, it's kind of sinister, but like in such an innocently naive way. And then it's like, who's to blame? Who is to blame? And maybe it's not really that deep. Maybe I shouldn't be asking these questions. But what I tell you, I wanted the best for Carrie. I really did. And I think that's one of the genius things about this book, is that you have this sinking sense of dread throughout. And then when you do get Carrie, you know, she's getting asked to prom by a popular guy at school. And you're like, oh yay, you know, like she's been included. Oh no, like there's something bad is going to happen. And then you have Carrie standing up to her mother and she's finally gotten confident. You're like, yes, Carrie, I'm so proud of you. Oh no, but I know exactly what's going to happen next because you're going to go to this prom and something bad's going to happen. You know what I mean? It's like we want Carrie to stand up for herself and defend herself. But at the same time, you know what's going to happen when she does. So it's like, are you rooting for Carrie? Are you rooting against Carrie? It's so conflicting. I'm so confused on my like final feelings for Carrie. I am heartbroken. I am seriously heartbroken for her when Sue finds her and she's dying and, you know, she cries for her mama and she says that her life has just been one big trick. Heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. She didn't really get a chance to lead a life, essentially. She was abused her entire life and then she retaliated and now she's dead. You know, like she had some semblance of normality before the end too, when Tommy suggests going for a burger and a root beer and she's overjoyed, her face lights up and it's like the most normal thing in the world. Everyone else takes that for granted, but Carrie, like, she never gets asked to go for a burger and have some root beer. She never gets asked. She's always the outcast. She's always the one being laughed at and ridiculed. But I want the best for Carrie, I do, but then she does what she does and she kills everyone, essentially. Like 440 people, I think, was the final body count. Awful, like absolutely awful. That's shocking. That's so many people. But I think that's so brilliantly juxtaposed with the building of her telekinesis, the building of her power, because it probably wouldn't have gotten to that point had everyone else not affected her too. So it's almost like a little bit of everyone is to blame for what happened to Carrie. So many people throwing their abuse and projecting themselves onto Carrie, and especially like Christine, for instance. Christine, if she had just let her alone, you know, like, oh, part of me is kind of glad that Billy and Christine got it before Carrie died, because, you know, those two were the ones that deserved it the most. And I don't think anyone really deserves like death and all that, but like in this fictional story, I would have been so pissed if they had lived because of everything that happened because of them. So yeah, I kind of felt a little bit satisfied at that. Call me what you want because of that, I don't care. But Carrie does seem to be the consequence of other people's actions, but in like a very extreme, horrific way, if that makes sense. And it feels a little moralistic because like when you have a character like Sue Snell, for instance, who actually felt sorry and guilty for what she did, she does accept the consequences of her actions. She doesn't go to prom and she lives, like she survives. She is rewarded for accepting the consequences of her at the start of the book when she laughs and throws tampons at Carrie. She partook in her humiliation and essentially the starting events of this book, and she accepted that that was a bad thing she did. She accepted it was a shitty thing she did, and she lives and she's rewarded for that behaviour. So I love that. I do kind of love that. So yeah, like the big event of this book is what happens at prom, the pouring of the buckets on Carrie and even on Tommy as well. Like Tommy gets some of it, but the bucket hits Tommy on the head, and while he doesn't die instantly, I think he dies in the explosion that happens later, because there was like this nice little bit with Tommy, and poor Tommy, like he genuinely was being so nice to Carrie. And when Carrie says, do you like me? And Tommy said, you're beautiful, and the narrator said she was, like, you know what I mean? Like the injustice, like Tommy was such a good guy too. But yeah, the bucket fell on him, and that's when it got really real for everyone else too. But what I love about that whole sequence is that you kind of don't know what's going on at that moment. You kind of feeling like you're a little bit in the dark too. And before this as well, you have things like Tommy Ross in the fading moments of his life now. And again, like, oh, the beat of this story, the narrative beats are just like getting more and more, and it's getting more scary now. You don't even need the score of a movie to build up to this moment. You can hear it in your own head with the length of the sentences and the foreshadowing, all of that. And then you get to the end of like the paragraph, because there aren't any chapters in this really. Like there are parts, but everything is like one long chapter essentially, which it is what it is. But yeah, you get her say, "I," she began, and then the music inside came to a jangling, discordant halt. For a moment, ragged voices continued oblivious, and then they stopped. There was a beat of silence, and then someone screamed. Silence again. Her very breath turned to glass in her throat, then inside the laughter began. So you don't actually like see the buckets come down on them. You don't see the blood come down on them. You don't even know really what's happening at that moment. You kind of just have to visualize it yourself and kind of assume it, because sometimes the narrative takes little jumps. Like here we don't get Carrie's point of view at all. You get other people's point of views. You get things about like the school being on fire. You get the We Survived the Black Prom by Norma Watson, and then you get her account of it. So you're getting someone else's account at that moment. Carrie got all the worst. One of them hit Tommy Ross in the head and made a very loud noise. Everyone was laughing at Carrie. Tommy was slumped over as if he's gone to sleep. Then Carrie hopped off the stage. And all of this stuff like never came back to me. I have seen both films, the original one and the one with Chloe Grace Moretz, and I think there might be more versions of Carrie, but those are the only two I've seen. But yeah, someone put his foot out, she went sprawling on her face, and then she said, "Oof, I remember that, it made me laugh even harder." Like, this is so cruel. This is so unbelievably cruel and awful. And then you get things about the city being on fire, and then you finally do get Carrie's POV. And they were laughing at her again, and suddenly it broke. The horrible realization of how badly she had been cheated came over her, and a horrible soundless cry tried to come out of her. She fled across the school's wide front lawn, losing both of her prom slippers and fleeing barefoot. It feels very Cinderella in a way, but like a really messed up, twisted version of it. You have Carrie so desperately wanting to escape, you know what they've just done to her, and then yeah, something snaps in her. The power. It was time to teach them a lesson, and you're like, this is like the turning point right now for like no coming back for her. You know, as soon as she does this, she isn't making it out alive herself. And the entire time she's just like watching things happen, you're hearing the commotion and the chaos and people dying, and it's awful. It's portrayed in such an exciting way due to the narrative style, but like it's massive, you know. It's just you know what I mean? It's like, it's just tragedy. It's essentially just a straight up tragedy. It's even more of a tragedy the fact that when she goes home, her mother is waiting for her, ready to kill her herself. It's an amazing scene between them, with Carrie making her mum's heart slow down and stop, and Carrie's mum, Margaret, she is reciting the Lord's Prayer as that's happening. Like, it's such an intense and terrifying scene of that. And all the while, Margaret has stabbed Carrie in the shoulder as well, leading to, you know, the things happen in the end, her finally dying, and her begging for her mum. You know, like, she dies begging for her mum. Oh my god. It's tragic. It's so tragic. But it's so good. Like, it's such a good book. Like, it's not bad in the state. If you ask me, it's not bad. And I freaking loved the ending of it too. Like, I know Stephen King does get a bad rep for not being able to end things, but the way that we come full circle pretty much, she dies and Sue is with her, and Sue, she hasn't had a period for a week. But then at the very end, after Carrie has died, Sue, she felt the slow course of dark menstrual blood down her thighs, and it just comes full circle. It just comes full circle. We have this incredibly important moment in these kids' lives, and Sue even says in her autobiography, we were just kids. We were just kids, and they were growing up. They were discovering their bodies, and Carrie and her power tied in with her becoming a woman and the menstrual blood and what that indicates. Like, it indicates life as well as death and the potential of a future. But Carrie doesn't have a future, and a lot of the poor kids who did end up dying, and some of them would have been innocent, you know, like, none of them deserve to die. I just want to say, like, none of them deserve to die, of course, but like, so many lives lost because of all of this, you know. It's I feel like I've probably said enough about this book, to be honest. I mean, I do have loads of notes about it, such as Carrie's actually funny if people give her a chance. When she's talking to, like, Frida and even Norma at the prom, she actually can have a genuine conversation with people, and I felt bad for Frida as well, because Frida was showing Carrie so much praise for the dress that Carrie made. This is what life could have been like for Carrie had people just accepted her. I really enjoyed it. I would probably give Carrie a 4-star out of 5. I was initially going to give it 3.5 because I do think sometimes Stephen King will gloss over some things. It isn't as detailed and as rich as some of his later books that I have read myself. Yeah, I was going to originally give it a 3.5, but after talking about it, after thinking about it, after writing all my notes down, I'm like, this deserves a 4 to me. Like, this deserves a better rating. It is genuinely such a great starting point to read Stephen King, to kind of get a feel of what his story style is like. You do get some really fleshed out characters, and you get some like iconic characters like Carrie, Carrie's mother. You know, it just all feels so real and tragic. And also, the world feels massive too. Like, just saying this too, with some of the articles about Carrie and the telekinesis and stuff, I found it so interesting when they're talking about telekinesis itself and people getting tested for telekinesis, and that if somebody does turn out to have it, they will just put a bullet in their head. And I'm like, that's such a huge thing. Like, that's such a huge implication of like the consequences of what happened with Carrie, and it makes the scope of this story even more massive. And it's like one of Stephen King's shortest books, I think. You know what I mean? It's like there are so many layers to this story and so many different background things that you can enforce on this story too, because of the inclusion of the scholarly articles and the fact that this whole thing was likened to being a monumental event on the same scale as the JFK assassination, which I do know Stephen King does write a story about that. And one last thing I will say about this is I kept seeing different Stephen King titles in this book. I saw Rage, I saw It, I saw Misery, I saw Christine. Obviously, they are just like normal random words, and I just found that interesting too. Anyway, I'm gonna stop talking about Carrie now, even though I feel like you could have a genuine full-on 5-hour discussion on Carrie despite the length. And let's just say we are off to a phenomenal start for this Stephen King adventure that I'm on. This is one of Stephen King's most popular books, and again, I've never read this before, never seen an adaptation, but I thought for the longest time that this would have been about witches or something like that, because, you know, Salem's Lot, I think of Salem. And I was doing 11-hour reading sprints yesterday in order to finish this book, and it turns out quite a few people didn't even realise this was about vampires themselves, so I'm glad I'm not the only one who thought that this could have potentially been about witches. And I would have loved it if it had been about witches. I mean, I do still really like this one a lot. This is the first time I've read a fresh new Stephen King book in 4 years. I think it's been about 4 years. And this was so good. And reading this right after Carrie as well, I can really see the writing quirks and the style of Stephen King. And it's amazing how much it was like solidified in his first couple of books. And I think it was perfected in this book as well. Do I think this is the best book of Stephen King's ever that I've read? No, not yet. But I did find some of it to be quite lush. Like, Stephen King has a way of writing horror in kind of a beautiful way, and I will give some examples a little bit later on. But even the mixed media format has been carried over into this too. I mean, not as pronounced as Carrie, but you do get like the whole newspaper stuff, you hear about the Marston house, and Stephen King, he is unrivaled in making his books feel very real. Like, these are real life characters dealing with something, a situation that isn't real. Like, vampires don't exist, but Stephen King makes you think that they do, because you have these characters who act like real life people trying to deal with that entire situation. And if you do not know what this is about, which I didn't going into it, I genuinely didn't, we follow an entire town essentially called Jerusalem's Lot, but it's been shortened down to Salem's Lot. And the story kind of kickstarts when Ben, who is a writer, comes to town. He used to live in Salem's Lot for 4 years when he was a boy, and he has memories of Marston House. And Marston House is this kind of abandoned place where something really horrific had happened, and it seems like every single time someone owns that house, kids go missing in the area. I remember reading that the last time somebody lived there, 4 kids were missing, and now Marston House is occupied again. So we have Ben, this newcomer, you know, he meets the people of the town, and we also find out who now owns Marston House. And can I just say as well, Marston House is so brilliant. Like, Marston House is such a brilliant secondary character that actually feels like the biggest character of this book. There are many times when you see a character just like looking up and saying Marston House, it seems like Marston House is on top of this entire town. It seems like every single direction you look, you will see the Marston House. And on page 176, everyone get your textbooks out. I love when, I can't remember who says it, because I've noticed as well a lot of the times when Stephen King is writing scenes with characters, he doesn't really name drop them too many times, and so you might get a little bit lost on who's saying what as the conversations are going on. But I think this is Matt who was saying this, but he says the Moss House has looked down on us for almost 50 years, all our sins and lies, like an idol. And a whole bit about idol, you know, like an idol, like something you pray to, or like a god, or something like that. Like that's what the Moss House feels like in this book, and I love the fact that Stephen King can really make it feel like the main character almost. And even just like this town in general, I loved it. I think it was in chapter 3 when it was like a sort of play-by-play in what was happening during the day, and you meet loads of different characters, and a lot of them are just doing like random mundane things, but every now and then you'll get this like really creepy thing that happens, or something that's like a little bit out of the ordinary. But I cannot tell you like how real these characters felt. I'm probably gonna say that so many times, but like, oh, like sometimes for better or worse, how real these characters felt. I will say as well, there was, you know, the use of the F word a lot, that rhymes with maggot, and like I should be offended, but I'm kind of not. Like I totally will be taking Stephen King's stories as, you know, these characters a lot of the times are just portraying real life people, and real life people use that word a lot. Awful real life people exist, and they will say and do whatever they want, and this is kind of like Stephen King's way of holding up a mirror to this society. And so whenever there's like so many uses of the F word, for instance, I'm not really offended personally. Not that I'm saying it's okay, but I'm just saying I'm taking Stephen King's stories as a mirror to the real world, while also kind of fracturing the mirror just a little bit to like twist it in a kind of horrific way. But anyway, yeah, we do meet this town. There are some really awful people, like Sandy. Oh my gosh, I will say do not read this book if you are triggered by baby abuse and animal abuse as well, like animal death, because wow, this was intense. And it was kind of back to back as well. You have Sandy, who was like punching a 10-month-old baby. She's a 17-year-old girl, and I get it, she's young, she's naive. She felt like she had her whole life ahead of her, for instance, and she's been kind of stuck in this role that she now has to fulfill, and she's taking it out on this baby. Oh my god, it made me so uncomfortable. My stomach was just in knots. Oh my god, like Stephen King does not shy away from the ugliest side of humanity, but that was like so much to read. And then the dog dead on the, I think it was the cemetery gates, that was also pretty horrific back to back. And I'm like, this is like in this massive chapter where you get like, oh, some random person, it's like a mundane kind of thing. There's like this bus driver, he's kicking kids off the bus, and he has this woman who's abusing her child, and a dead dog hanging from a gate. You know what I mean? It's like you do get awful people and you get like good people, but like it's kind of all people. They all exist in this place and they have their routine, and it just shows us what the status quo is, kind of. And then, you know, shit starts hitting the fan. Although it's slow, like this is a very slow going book to begin with. At first I was thinking, god, this is like maybe a little bit too long, but I was still enjoying the slow build because, yeah, I did like say for instance, it was during chapter 3 actually, when those two kids, it was Danny and, it's not Richie. No. Ralphie. Oh my god, Ralphie. Yeah, I'm not going to be the best with character names for a little while, but I am doing my best. Danny and his brother Ralphie, they go to visit Mark, and on the way there, oh my god, it's so creepy. It is so creepy. And this is probably like the first instance where you feel the creepiness with the overall plot, like with the vampires and stuff. So they're currently going through the woods and they're talking about like ghost stories and stuff, and then it gets to Danny stopped, and in the way of children he did feel something and knew they were no longer alone. And Stephen King taps into this very real fear when you're a child and you think that maybe your imagination is maybe playing tricks on you. However, kids do sometimes have the uncanny ability to feel like the presence of somebody else being there, like somebody who shouldn't belong. And that's exactly what Danny feels here. And you don't really see what happens, but you do end up finding out that Ralphie has gone missing, and Danny is like sick, and he goes to the hospital, he dies. And oh my god, I didn't realize that one of the main antagonists of this book would be a child called Danny. Like, I didn't realize that's what would happen. He is like the first person to turn. We meet Stroker and we meet Barlow, and I keep wanting to say Bram Stoker because those names kind of mishmash into like Bram Stoker a little bit, but no, we have Barlow and Straker. Very mysterious. Those are like the real antagonists. Barlow is essentially like the, I guess, the Dracula kind of person, and I did hear that Stephen King was inspired by Dracula and stuff, and I could see that. I have read Dracula, and I could see certain scenes in my head when I was reading this, like when they're trying to figure out what to do in this town that's about, well, it's getting overrun essentially by the undead. It's getting overrun by vampires, and there were so many scenes that kind of played in my head that was like calling back to Dracula, so I could feel that tension and that atmosphere. I thought it was replicated beautifully, but like in Stephen King's own way. But I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of myself. There are so many notes on this one. So Ben is a good protagonist. I wasn't sure what his age was. Somebody told me he's like 55. I was like, I didn't feel he was 55. I thought he was like mid to late 30s. And then Susan, who he ends up meeting and who I really ended up liking, I assume she was like in her mid-20s or like late 20s or something. So I didn't see like too much of a problem with like their relationship or anything. So I'm just gonna stick with my version of events in my head that Ben is in his mid to late 30s and Susan's in her mid-20s. But I did like how they met in the park. Like, it was kind of innocent. Susan had his book and he was autographing it for her, and you know, you find out that Susan has these dreams of going to New York and she doesn't have like a plan or anything really. She doesn't have any job offers. She just wants to go. And it was that drive, it was that ambition that made me really like Susan. Like, she really was going for what she wanted, and she said at one point she wants Ben, and by George, did she get Ben. It does go a little bit quick for my liking though, like even for such a long book. Like, say on page 58 they say I like you to each other, which is fine, and Susan says, but go slow, remember I'm just a small town girl. And then literally a couple of paragraphs later, would you like to come to dinner at my house tomorrow night? My folks would love to meet you. I'm like, meeting the parents? Are you telling me that's slow? Are you telling me meeting the parents is slow? I say, I don't understand the heteros. I really don't. Especially since they do end up saying I love you to each other as well, which is so sweet. It is so sweet as well. And I'm like, damn, you guys think that homos go fast? The story of Hubie and Birdie Marston and how she was found dead and he hanged himself, that was incredibly creepy. And especially the story that Ben tells Susan about how he went in one day, like I think it was like 9 or something, he was a small child, and he went in to get a souvenir to impress his friends, and he went to the room where Hubie had hanged himself, and he sees Hubie hanging there when he shouldn't really be hanging there. And that was such a scary visual for me. And this was pretty early on in the book, and there was that kind of like slow creeping atmosphere that built to that kind of flashback scene. That was so good. Like, I crept up the stairs, a little kid 9 years old, scared shitless. And he gets to the door, it flew open, and there was Hubie hanging from the beam with his body silhouetted against the light from the window. And Susan's like, you don't really think you saw Hubert Marston, did you? And he says, I don't know. It's that kind of questioning of, what has he seen in the past? Did he actually see it? Is he crazy? Is he going insane? Is he that obsessed with the Marston house that it's made him see things? Is the Marston house the real villain? Does the Marston house project things onto the residents to make them go crazy? You know, you just don't know these things at this point. Another fantastically creepy scene was when Royal and Hank, they have to go and pick a delivery thing up for Straker that Larry sends them to do, and they have like their set instructions of what to do exactly, and like leaving something in the cellar and putting the keys on the table. But when Royal and Hank are coming out, they remember, oh, we forgot to put the keys on the table. So Hank ends up going back down, and like, you just feel the fear. Like, this is a grown-ass man, and you can feel his fear through the writing. It makes me scared as well. I'm like, okay, if this grown-ass man is scared, I should be scared too, right? And, you know, he's going slowly down, he sees a rat, but then he sees a shirt. Was that a shirt? Bundled up like an old rag, something behind it, might have been blue jeans, something that looked like something snapped behind him, panicked, threw the keys, ran. Like, that scene was intense. It was intense, very suspenseful, and you do get quite a few suspenseful scenes in this book. So Danny dies, and my heart absolutely reached out to his dad during the funeral. No, Tony Glick screamed and propelled himself forward. You ain't gonna throw no dirt on my boy. And then he lands on the coffin with a horrid heavy thump. Danny, you come out of there, he bawled. Like, isn't that just heartbreaking? Like, someone's father, during their funeral, throwing themselves on the coffin that's been lowered into the ground and demanding their dead child to come out. Like, that is so heartbreaking. Like, there's no other word for it. I felt so much emotion for Tony. Like, did I like Tony as a character? Not really. But I did feel something for him because he represents a grieving father. And, you know, like, that's heartbreaking. Like, you have so much empathy for a lot of the people in here. Doesn't mean you have to like them, but sometimes you do feel so much empathy for them because of the situations they found themselves in. And it's one of the reasons why I do really, really like Salem's Lot. Oh, and then the scene when Mike is, you know, putting the dirt on the coffin of Danny, and then he says, well, he looks up at the Marston house, because the Marston house is always watching. Always a watching. He says, it occurred to him that the feeling of being watched had stopped as soon as he could no longer see the coffin, which indicates that, okay, something inside the coffin is watching him, right? Like, Danny's body's in there, what do you mean? And then shovel out the dirt, that was the ticket, shovel it out and break the lock. and open the coffin and close those awful staring eyes, because you don't know if his eyes are actually open or not. You don't know whether he's dead, or like there hasn't been any like mention of vampires up to this point. Like nothing like that has happened just yet. But then he gets the coffin open, the eyes were open, wide open and hardly glazed at all. There was no death pallor in that face. Bloody terrifying. Are you kidding me? This boy should be rotting away dead. But no, he looks pretty much alive, kind of, and his eyes are wide open. And yeah, it turns out that Mark feeling watched was valid. Like, that was a valid concern, because he was being watched. You can just imagine Mark walking around the graveyard and just Danny's eyes just following him from the coffin. Oh god. I will say, I wasn't really that scared while reading Salem's Lot. It takes so much to actually genuinely scare me, but I was very creeped out by a lot of things in this. Another incredibly creepy scene is, and like, this book is filled with very, very creepy scenes, I will say, is when Matt and Susan are talking and they're in Matt's house, and he stops her, like he stops talking, and he says there's someone upstairs. She listened, nothing. You're imagining things. I know my house, he said softly. Someone is in the guest bedroom. There, you hear? And this time she did hear. Oh, chills. Like, I got chills during that. This is the brilliant thing about Salem's Lot, is that we've been introduced to these characters who know this town inside out, so when something odd does happen, they can recognize it instantly. So if there is an intruder in someone's house and it makes a noise that they're not familiar with, they're going to know that something is up. They're going to know that there's someone in the house that shouldn't be there. And I love the exploration of like the vampire lore too. You know, like with the puncture wounds on the neck, and it disappears after their death, and they've kind of been reborn as an undead being. You get Ben having to sort of fill in for a sort of like priest role in terms of like blessing something and repelling these creatures of the night. These real life people, that's what it feels like. These real life people have to really improvise and think outside the box a little bit in order to try and defeat what has, you know, unfolded in Salem's Lot. Like, they are up against something they've never had to be up against before, and so they're improvising, they're just going with it. You're the writer, Ben, you know, like, make it up. Do a prayer, do something. You see the hysteria take over the town, almost like the vampirism that is also spreading throughout the town. And it's kind of slow progress, and a lot of the times it's kind of vague when these things happen, which again, like, this is the brilliance of Stephen King's writing. Not everything is just straightforward. Not everything is told to you in such a direct way. You kind of have to go with some of the poetry of his writing in order to say exactly what's going on. In some vampire books, you just get the whole, he bit into his neck and he died, you know, like just things like that, like as an example. But Stephen King, he does, like, say for Corey, and oh my god, the affair between Bonnie and Corey, and then I think his name is Reggie, comes back and sees him, and that whole scene with him putting the unloaded gun in Corey's mouth and everything, that was intense, that was dramatic. But when Corey gets turned by Barlow, and Barlow, he is a great villain. Very kind of charismatic, but also just genuinely terrifying. But yeah, Corey Bryan sank into a great forgetful river, and that river was time, and its waters were red. That doesn't exactly say Barlow sunk his teeth into Corey's neck, drained him of his blood, and killed him, causing him to resurrect. Stephen King isn't that straightforward. Instead, he talks about a forgetful river, river was time, waters were red. You know, it's just like, that's kind of beautiful, okay? It's kind of beautiful. It's so creepy with the baby as well. Poor Randy. Well, that 10-month-old Randy McDougal did not even struggle when Danny Glick slipped through his bedroom window and plucked the baby from his crib and sank his teeth into a neck still bruised from a mother's blows. Like, oh, that is just heartbreaking. That poor baby. That poor baby. And not even just that, but when the coroner is, I think, examining the body and stuff. Where is it? Yeah, this fucking thing is empty. Whose idea of a joke? I was on the desk all the time. No one went by me, I'd swear to it. It must have happened on Carly's shift. What's the name of that one? McDougal Randall Freitas. What does the abbreviation INF mean? Infant. Jesus Christ, I think we're in trouble. So this body at the morgue has just gone missing, and it's a 10-month-old baby. Where did the body go? Did Randy wake up? Is he now like this kind of superhuman vampire baby? Or did like something like Danny or someone come and get the baby? Yeah, oh my god, it's just talking about it makes me feel a little bit sick. Stephen King does not shy away from it being that awful. I felt so sad when Susan died. Oh, are you kidding me? Again, you're not 100% sure she's like turned just yet. She's by herself, and her section ends with, and she knew someone was behind her even before the hand fell on her shoulder. And then you don't see her again until she's outside of Mark's house, and she's like looking through the window. The white face in the darkness outside the glass was Susan's. Mark, let me in. Let me in, I'll show you. I'll kiss you, Mark. I'll kiss you all over like your mother never did. There are lots more of us now. Let it be me, Mark. I'm hungry. You know, it's like, Susan, she had dreams, she had hopes. And then when she dies, and Ben sees that small glimpse of who she was at the park when they first met, so sad. And I didn't think I would care that much about some of the characters, but I kind of do by the end of this. Charlie Rhodes, his death as well, when the bus driver, when he's surrounded by the kids and Danny's there laughing and smiling, like, Danny's fucking creepy. I just really despise creepy kids. They get under my skin, they really do. There's just something so unnatural about it, because children should live to be adults, you know, like, they're too young. They're too young, and Stephen King plays on that in this book a couple of times. A few times, more than a couple of times. And it's just both heartbreaking and terrifying at the same time. Yeah, I think the kids surround him and Danny's laughing. Like, do you have to? And when he's like, oh, let me in, Mark, let me come and play. I'm just, no. Playtime is over. Also loved when the narrator said it was as if God himself had turned his face away from them. Like, the feeling of desolation, of loneliness, the hopelessness of the situation they're in is so powerful. Yeah, maybe God has turned his face away from this town. Is everyone doomed? Is everyone going to die? Like, is this just going to be something that may potentially affect everyone else too? Is it going to spread outside of Jerusalem's Lord? There are so many questions. And how nightmarish it becomes when they come face to face with Barlow. He's sitting up in his coffin, those red eyes flashing with hellish triumph. Like, I love vampire stories. I've been burned out on them in the past, but I read Empire the Vampire by J. Kristoff and I loved it. And this as well feels like vampire fiction, back to the roots it's supposed to. Like, these really nightmarish creatures that you should be terrified of. In the way that he dies as well, he brought the hammer down again and again. Blood burst from Barlow's nostrils. His body began to jerk in the coffin like a stabbed fish. And just like the hammering down on it, is Ben is like hammering the stake in, and the blood that's coming out and stuff. It's like so gnarly, so grisly, and it's exactly what I want from vampire fiction. As much as I hate blood, seeing this much blood, like in a gushing, very unapologetically disgusting way, it's perfect. It's perfect. And then the town's taken over by The Walking Dead. Did Robert Kirkman, who created The Walking Dead, did he get that line from this? Like, is that what inspired him to call his series The Walking Dead? Well, I imagine Stephen King didn't make up the phrase The Walking Dead, or did he? I actually don't know. But they were in the streets, The Walking Dead. Like, what's the solution? They do leave Salem's Lot and then they come back like a year later to set fire to the place. But you still don't really know exactly what's happening next. There is a short story at the end of this. Like, this book is only 600 pages. I thought it was like over 740, but there are like deleted scenes at the end, which I haven't read. I will probably read them at some point, but I just wanted to experience Salem's Lot the way it's supposed to be, with just what was like published as Salem's Lot for this video series. But there is also a short story called One for the Road, which I believe is in a collection called Night Shift. So I didn't read this either. I'm going to wait until I do my collections video and read it for that video. But I do think this is like 2 years after, or there might be another story called Jerusalem's Lot in the Night Shift book that is set 2 years after or something. So we will see more of this, which is good. I'm excited for that. But yeah, this turned out to be shorter than I thought, but it did feel like it was going on a little bit too long by a certain point. And I do think this could have been perfect almost if it had been a little bit shorter, at least in my humble opinion. There wasn't really much that I could really criticize other than the length, really. But I am going to give this one a 4 stars, which is the same rating I gave Carrie. But I do think this is better than Carrie. I think both Carrie and Salem's Lot do things very obviously very differently, but both of them are very great at what they do. And if I was to rank them, I would put Salem's Lot above Carrie, but I still don't think this is like a 4.5 or a 5 star. Like, it doesn't feel like that in my heart of hearts. The atmosphere and the creepiness of this was fantastic. I imagine this is the kind of story I would have to reread a couple of times for me to love even more. I think this has so much rereadability, so much that you could have missed the first time round. Some of the other like underlying themes that you could pick apart, but just based off good instinct alone, it's like a 4 star to me. And it's so weird as well, my camera is thinking that this is a face. It's not a face, is it? No. Oh yeah, it's doing it again. It's like picking it up as if it's a face. Have I got a haunted copy of Salem's Lot? That's weird. Kind of want to put that down now. It's creeped me out a little bit. But yeah, I think it's one that you will probably appreciate the more you read it. And now that I know kind of what to expect too, going into this one blind, I had no idea what the pacing was going to be like, when I was supposed to learn information on characters, or when the plot was supposed to kick in and stuff. But now I do think I would enjoy it more on a reread. There was just so much there, so many characters. Sometimes Stephen King is very, very dense, and you just need that like little extra. And sometimes you need a couple of reads in order to like fully understand a Stephen King book. But yeah, that was Salem's Lot. It was great. It was great. My first original Stephen King in a few years, and I'm very excited to see if it ends up being my favourite one of this vlog. This is when I think I'm going to start getting dislikes on this video. I am so sorry to everyone this is going to affect. I didn't love The Shining. I still liked it. I thought it was good, but definitely my least favourite so far. And I was looking back at my rating for it a few years ago, and I thought I gave it 4 stars then, and I hadn't. So I will stick by my rating that I gave it the last time, which I will tell you in a minute. And while it has been a few years since I last watched the movie, I feel like maybe the story was done a little bit better in the film. But I will say that I do 100% prefer the characters in this book over the film. I think this one does a fantastic job at showing the complexities of Jack, for instance. I think he is a much more like it's so complex, the feelings towards Jack, you know, like you see him as a loving father, but he does things, he has an awful temper, he's hurt his son before, he's quite abusive, but you do feel the love that he has for his family. You feel how lost he would be without his wife Wendy. You feel how much he loves his son Danny. Like you do feel that a lot more through the book than you do in the movie, and it has been a few years again, so I can't really remember. But I will say, however, Jack Nicholson is a fantastic actor, and I do think he does a fantastic job with what he is given in the script, I guess. But yeah, I'm going to talk through all of my thoughts and feelings on The Shining, and yeah, it's not all negative or anything. It's just I found the majority of this to be, well, I say majority of this, by the 300 page mark I was kind of wanting this book to be over. Salem's Lot is longer than The Shining. This is almost 500 pages in my copy, whereas Salem's Lot was like 600. But with Salem's Lot I felt like it kind of kept my attention most of the time. This one I found myself meandering. I felt like there was a lot of meandering in the plot of this. You will get so many sections where there is a whole dump of information. Like you get a whole chapter that's quite long of like newspaper articles of the Overlook Hotel from years and years and years ago that gives you so much context and so much history to the place. But you know, I don't think that's the most creative way of telling us the history of the Overlook and what kind of happened in the past. I would have much preferred to have been shown it, because in my opinion I don't think a lot of scary stuff actually happens in this book. I can only tell you 2 things that I genuinely found scary. One of them is, you know, Nick Grandma in room 217, and the other one is Jack snapping and turning against his family. Those 2 things I found scary. Everything else I really didn't. You know what? I found this book a lot more fascinating than I did scary, and it's why I haven't given this a terrible rating by any means. I do think there is still so much here that is quite, you know, what's the word, like chewy. Like there's a lot to chew on with this book. It kind of actually lost me in terms of keeping a kind of coherent plot, in my opinion. So let's start with the characters actually. Jack is a bit of a judgmental prick from the very beginning. Like he does have a temper. His anger issues are very prominent, and you do find out about his alcoholism. I can never say the word. Alcoholism. That's it, isn't it? Alcoholism. Anyway, yeah, so you do find that he has a problem with drink, but ever since he, you know, broke his child's arm, he has kind of stayed off it. And I think about like a year after that, I think it was, he swore off the drink. So like he was stone cold sober. He swore it off, and you know, like when you get characters like Jack, you will automatically want to write him out as somebody who has abused his child. And you already think like he's not that good a man, but you see him trying to, I don't know, like kind of make up for it with the love that he kind of showers upon his boy. You see how much Danny loves his dad, and a lot of this book is pretty much from Danny's POV. Like he is, I guess, more of the main character than anything else. He is the one with the shining. He has the knack. He has the power, which I found really fascinating as well, because I don't think the movie really highlighted that too much, at least not from what I can remember. And I didn't really remember a whole lot from the first time I read this book, so like a lot of it felt like reading it for the first time, and a lot of the stuff was, you know, very fresh to me. But you do see through Danny how much he loves and kind of idolizes his dad too. He's very aware though. He is very smart for being a 5-year-old going on 6. Like he is so well spoken. He is so intuitive, which obviously ties into The Shining, like his knack, his ability. And I, for the majority of this book, was like, a 5-year-old wouldn't talk like this and this, that and the other. And then when you hear, you know, the doctor talk about him, even he says, oh yeah, he's very well spoken for a 5-year-old. But I feel like, you know, Stephen King does resolve a lot of the issues that I have with this book with the actual like explanations of the text. Like with Danny, he is very intuitive. He has the precognitive abilities kind of thing. Like he is exposed to a lot more adult things, and he can hear, you know, sometimes people's thoughts when they're thinking loud enough and stuff like that. So he is constantly aware of things around him, and that's kind of forcing him to grow up a little bit quicker. And you get that through his dialogue. He speaks like an adult half the time, and it's kind of interesting to see that progression, especially when you get to the end with the confrontation between Jack and Danny, and him having to kind of like stand up to his father as he's taken over by the Overlook Hotel. I found that incredibly fascinating, considering he is the child who has had to grow up a little bit too much before his time. And that's kind of tragic in its own way. You see Danny like rejecting his own abilities. You see Danny being like, I don't want this, like I just want to be normal kind of thing. And that kind of ties into the themes of this book and the relationships between the characters. So again, with Jack, it is a very complex situation where you kind of want to write him off to begin with because of what he did to Danny, but you say how much Danny loves his dad, and you say how much his dad is trying to change and be a better dad to him, something that you never really get in the movie. It is kind of heartbreaking because you see this family unit starting to get closer again. You even get a point of the book where Wendy says, oh, this is the first time I've been happy since the marriage, you know, in such a long time. And Jack is like, really? And she's like, really? And like, you can see how much they want to be a family. You could see how much they want to get past the, you know, the traumas of the past and move on and become better people. But the Overlook has other ideas, of course. So with Jack, it's very complex. It's very complicated. Wendy definitely has a lot more agency in this book than she does in the movie too. I really love that she at one point was even like, okay, I want a divorce and I want to talk to Jack about it. I want to like have a proactive approach to this relationship. And, you know, like Jack can sort of manipulate the situation, and he's like, let's talk about this time next week. And he is able to like change things. But you can definitely say Wendy's doing a little bit more than I guess her movie counterpart tried to do. I will say as well though, Shelley Duvall, again, love you. R.I.P. I thought you did a great job. And I'm not talking about it right now, but like when Wendy, she tries to defend herself when Jack does go like crazy, like when the Overlook has actually taken over him, and you see like how desperate she is to live and how desperate she is for her son to live. Again, you get to see a lot more of her kind of come through, and like her motherly instincts come through then. And then again, there was another part of it where it kind of clashed with that I'm not really sure how I feel about it, but I will get to that when I get to the ending. Danny I thought was great. I did think having a lot of this from his POV helped with some of the horror of this book, because, you know, he is still, you know, a very young child. A lot of it is very confusing to him, so because of that, a lot of it's confusing to us. We don't quite know what we're saying or what we're supposed to say, what's real and what's not real. There's a lot of like playing with the narrative, which I think fits a 5-year-old. You get some like childish things happening in this, and yet you have a kind of sinister twist to it too. And I kind of love and hate that. So again, I will get to some of the reasons why I kind of hate those aspects to it. Danny was like the driving force though behind a lot of the plot, and that's another reason why I really enjoyed him. Like say when he goes into a trance and he's talking about Tony, and Tony is supposed to be his like imaginary friend, although we do end up finding out that, at least I think so, like a lot of it is still up in the air and a lot of it is like still a mystery, but I do believe Tony is just Danny, but like 5 or 10 years in the future. I think it was 10. And then I kind of don't understand that as well, because if it is, you know, Danny 10 years in the future, why is he scaring himself so much? You know, like he scares Danny so much at the start of this, you know, with the whole like red room and some of the things that he shows him. I don't know if it's explained really, but like why can't, you know, Danny 10 years in the future go back and tell him, hey, your dad's going to be taken over by the Overlook Hotel, he's going to try and kill everyone, stay away. Like, instead of just giving him, like, these vague visuals of the Overlook Hotel and, you know, trying to scare him. Like, I can kind of see why he would do that, but at the same time, not, because if Danny has lived through that experience, then he knows, surely, that what he does when he appears to him as Tony doesn't quite work. He needs to be a lot more forthcoming about it, right? Like, anything to do with, like, kind of time travel and, you know, warning your past self things, like some of that just kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So please, if anyone's watching this and you can explain this better to me down below, then please let me know. I just find it odd that if his future self was Tony and he had the ability to maybe stop what happened to the Overlook, why didn't he? You know, why did he kind of terrorize a 5-year-old child? Why did he terrorize himself? You know, I don't understand all of that. Why did he tell Danny to lock the door when he was having his, you know, his trance, his episode? Was he trying to be I mean, maybe it was because he didn't want to be interrupted by Wendy and Jack, but like still, I don't know. I don't quite understand that. It was a good little twist though, because a lot of the time I was like, who is Tony? Like, why doesn't Danny see him up close? Because there was a lot of mention of how, you know, Danny never actually gets to see his face and stuff because he seems a little bit, you know, too far away, but like also kind of close, but not too close, and that he seems to be potentially 11 or potentially driving age. There's a lot of mystery and intrigue behind that. So I did like that. I did like the whole stuff with that because, as I say, yeah, Danny was the driving force behind a lot of the like scares and the plot of this. So for instance, when we get that really scary scene in room 217 with the naked lady, when I tell you that was like one of the very few moments in this book that actually made me scared, I mean it. Like, it was kind of terrifying when you had this 5-year-old child in his bathroom. Okay, page 239. Although it would have been amazing if it happened on page 217, right? Yeah, he pulled the shower curtain back. The woman in the tub had been dead for a long time. She was blown and purple, her gas-filled belly rising out of the cold, ice-rimmed water like some fleshy island. Her eyes were fixed on Danny's, glassy and huge like marbles. She was grinning, her purple lips pulled back in a grimace, her breasts lolled, her pubic hair floated, her hands were frozen on the nailed porcelain sides of the tub like crab claws. The woman was sitting up, still grinning. You know, like, that was terrifying. She was a corpse in dead long years. Although I don't know if she has actually been dead for long years. Somebody did mention that the woman had only been dead since last July because there was a maid who saw her ghost. I'm pretty sure this is the lady who overdosed and she was like staying at the hotel with a younger man and stuff like that. I'm sure that was her, but she only died last July, so she wouldn't have been dead years. But maybe the overlook made it look like she had been dead for so many years. Like, you know, every single time I think there's a plot hole, I do think the overlook can kind of fix that. And yeah, so like maybe take some of my criticisms with a grain of salt. But yeah, him actually being like kind of trapped in the room, even though it said all he had to do was like turn the handle and he would be able to get out. But you know, when you're a kid and you're that terrified, you don't really think of those things. Those fish smelling hands closed softly around his throat. You know, like, that was terrifying. That was terrifying. A naked lady, a naked dead lady coming towards you. Look, any naked ladies coming towards me would scare me. I'm not gonna lie. And there were some scenes with like hedge animals. Now I'm gonna tell you up front, I find those ridiculous. I really don't like the hedge animals thing. All they are just like big bushes. They're just big bushes. And when Halloran gets attacked by the hedge lion later on, I was trying to picture it in my head and it came across as so ridiculous in my head. It's just like this big bush with potential claws clawing at Halloran. It's a lion. Like, there's a rabbit one as well, and they're like these big hedges. That's not terrifying to me. I'm sorry, that's not scary whatsoever. There was also a moment with a man dressed as a dog, and like he was weird. Yeah, his chin and cheeks were smeared with blood. Like, I feel like a lot of this book, Stephen King thought by just having blood added to it, it would make it scary. Like, say when Danny is seeing the like they're getting a tour and I think he's seeing the presidential suite and he sees the blood and brains on the wallpaper and stuff. That was creepy at the time, but the book as a whole, by the end of it, when you think back on all the scary things, it's just like Stephen King add a little bit of blood to make it scary. So like this guy dressed as a dog, yeah, the man's mouth and chin and cheeks were smeared with blood. He was grinning, but the growl was real. It was deep in his throat. I'm going to eat you up, little boy, and I think I'll start with your plump little cock. Like, it's just weird. It's so weird. And he's barking and he's like chasing him. Like, I don't know. I didn't know about that. I was like, okay. So these are these scary things we're getting in this one. We're not going to get anything with the Grady, the previous caretaker who killed his wife and 2 daughters, like the 8 and 6-year-old. Like, we got mention of that. In fact, we got mention of that in the very first chapter. And one of the things that I think The Shining kind of lacks is some of the subtlety with where the plot is going. So in the very first chapter, you hear about Grady, the previous caretaker, killing his wife and his daughters, right? And so you can kind of judge from that alone that that is exactly where the plot is going to go. Jack is going to try and kill his wife and son at the Overlook Hotel. That's exactly what happens. So you get kind of the idea of what's going to happen in this book from the very first chapter. And when you start Carrie, say you've never heard of Carrie before, you've never watched the films, same with Salem Slot, which with Salem Slot, it was my first time. I had no idea what the hell was going to go on in that one. You don't get in the very first chapter the entire premise or the entire plot of the book. It's a lot more subtle. You kind of find out as you go. But with The Shining, I feel like you get too much too quickly, and then you get really not that much like scariness with Grady and his daughters or anything like that. One of the things I love about the movie is when you see the two girls and then they're suddenly dead and then they're normal again. It's like, that's so creepy. But in this, the closest you get to that really is when Grady is talking to Jack as he's kind of hallucinating about, like, you know, the ballroom and Lloyd giving him the drinks, although it kind of gets real in a way. Like, Grady is talking to him anyway, and Jack's like, oh, didn't you kill your girls and stuff? And Grady's like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. That's kind of the closest you get with anything to do with Grady and his daughters and his wife. Like, if we had gone like a little bit more of the deaths in the hotel, that would have been amazing. You do care about the gangmen who died. There was one year in 1961 about a writer's retreat and one of the authors fell out the window and died. Like, I would have loved it if we had had a little bit more of the creepiness of the hotel, not just like a random man in a dog costume barking and wanting a 5-year-old's, like, you know what I mean? Like, I want none of that. I wanted the previous caretaker who killed people, and this is exactly what's happening. Like, history is repeating. I would have loved to have seen a little bit more than that. The woman in the bathtub was like the only scary thing really until Jack snaps. And one of the things, okay, so I was like, okay, the ending of this book, like, I loved like maybe like the last 100 pages, I think. I was really enjoying that. That's exactly what I was reading this book for. And I was thinking, okay, this is happening a little bit too quickly. It happened a little bit out of nowhere and it kind of feels a little bit rushed. But then on the flip side of that, I was like, this is kind of genius as well, because Jack has just snapped. The narrative has just snapped. This feels like a very purposeful thing that Stephen King has done, that at this point, you know, it's been building and building and building up to this point, and then Jack snaps. You know, he has that drink. He has that drink. He's been resisting it, and he has that first drink. Lloyd, who, you know, when we first saw Lloyd, he was imaginary, and we didn't hear Lloyd say anything. There was no dialogue with Lloyd. And then when we see him again, and Jack is seeing all of the other people too, and they're all telling him to drink, Lloyd is actually speaking to Jack. So you see the progression of that through the fact that Lloyd is actually now talking. He has a voice now, and that shows you just how far Jack has fallen as well. And then he takes a drink and he snapped. Like, that's what it took. It kind of ties into the themes of alcoholism. It kind of beautifully ties back to that, and you see just how quickly someone can change when they allow the drink to come back into their life after swearing it off for so long, in kind of what the real evil is in this kind of story. You do have the Overlook. I think there was a point in this where it said something like, this inhumane place makes human monsters or something like that. It's kind of the same with drink and alcohol, all of that. It can really change someone. It can flip them. They can become a totally different person when they've had a drink. And I felt that was beautifully personified in Jack. In fact, the whole Overlook Hotel felt a little bit of a personification of Jack. And again, this is just like an interpretation. I could be totally wrong. But, you know, when we first get introduced to the Overlook Hotel, it's with Ullman and Jack, and he's doing the interview thing, and Ullman says something like, the Overlook has changed hands over the years. It's had a different owner, and like no one's really like stayed too much. And to me, that made the Overlook Hotel feel like an orphan child. The Overlook Hotel is going from parent to parent, and none of the parents can handle it, so they leave this orphan child. So then it felt like, oh, the Overlook Hotel itself is so incredibly lonely, and it needs Danny and his powers in order to not feel so lonely anymore. And that's why it's playing these games. Like, the Overlook Hotel is kind of one to play with people's lives, and it just wants to let them leave. You get a section of this, I think it was one of the endings of the chapters, when the characters go into the Overlook Hotel and it swallows them up. And, you know, the Overlook Hotel feels real. It feels like a living, breathing thing. A little bit like the Marston House in Salem Start, how the Marston House is like overlooking everyone and it's always kind of watching in a way. The Overlook Hotel, it wants to like eat you up. It wants to consume you, and it feels like it doesn't want to be lonely. And considering I haven't even told you what this book is about, have I? I don't think I really need to at this point. The fact that Jack is the caretaker and he has to like look after the place when the place is dead, like there's nobody else around, it kind of solidifies that idea that the Overlook just doesn't want anyone to leave it, and it just wants company in a way. Like, I don't know, like there's some like twisted versions of that. I think it is isolated for a good chunk of the year while, you know, the snowstorm is happening happening. And I love the isolated setting, I really do. I love the descriptions of it. I love the fact that the snow is blocking everyone else from coming, and it's blocking everyone from leaving the Overlook Hotel. But I will say it got really, really repetitive by the end too. We would get like the snow was coming, it was serious snow now. In about 5 or 6 chapters ended with something kind of like this one at the end of chapter 41. Outside the snow came harder, curtaining them off from the world. That just kept happening. I was like, okay, I get the point. The snow is cutting them off from everyone else. Like, it happened about 5 or 6 times. I was like, I get it. I get it. They're isolated. The snow has cut them off from the rest of the world. I get it. Some of it did feel a little bit repetitive. And as I mentioned before, by the 300-page mark, I was like, okay, I'm kind of over this a little bit now. I didn't really care about Jack antagonizing Ullman. I didn't think that really like led to anything deep, really. I did like exploring Jack's background too, and the relationship with his dad, in how his dad was also abusive to him, and that kind of whole cycle of like fatherly abuse and how that can trickle down and kind of become hereditary. The consequences of people's actions constantly coming back in how you raise someone also is like a good like kind of question. And I feel like every single book so far by Stephen King, they've all been wildly different, but I think a lot of times you have to examine like who's to blame for some of the actions of people, especially like Carrie, for instance, you know, the whole bullying aspect of it and the raising of Carrie by Margaret. With The Shining, you do have like, oh, Jack's dad would beat Jack up and your heart breaks for him as a kid, and then you see that cycle happen again, and you see Jack as well trying to blame other people for his need to return to the drink, and I think he blamed Wendy at one point. So there's like a whole lot of blame kind of being thrown around, and you kind of have to look very deep for like, okay, who is to blame? Should we blame ourselves for our own actions? Did anything influence our actions and stuff like that? It's very interesting. There was a whole section of this book, especially as we're like ramping up to the end, when the ghosts of the Overlook who have appeared to Jack and are telling him to drink and stuff, they're telling him to unmask. And I kind of like that idea of Jack taking off a mask when he kind of snaps and he just like fully becomes well, I mean, from the very beginning, he did like beat a student up almost to the brink of death. He did abuse his child and stuff like that. Like, he's always been angry. In fact, at one point it said something about like the red mist of rage or something. Like, that rage has always been within him, and now the Overlook Hotel is allowing him to unmask. But it does mean that he's always been him on the inside. I think maybe that's something the movie was trying to explore. If Jack has taken off his mask, he's always been that inside. Maybe the ghosts of the Overlook were talking to Jack as if Jack was the Overlook Hotel, because, you know, Wendy even mentioned at one point, oh, that isn't Jack anymore, the Overlook has overtaken him, kind of thing. So actually, yeah, because when Jack is about to take his first drink, he hesitates. He hesitates taking that drink, and he remembers what he's done after he's had a drink, and he resists. He resists. And then he does actually have a drink, so maybe that's the moment when the Overlook overtakes him, and that's when everyone is shouting, unmask, unmask. And that's like, take Jack's mask off, and you are the Overlook Hotel now. In Jack's body. I don't know, I'm trying to work through some things. Like, this is, again, like a very fascinating book. There is so much to talk about, so much to unpack, and I think that, you know, warrants to give it a good rating at least, because I do have so much to say about it. As I've had so much to say about all of the Stephen King books so far. I feel like I've been all over the place with this one, like I have with all of them, but I'm just like scrolling through my notes. Yeah, I even wrote the book is more fascinating than it is scary, and I do stand by that. The whole Shining stuff, again, is incredibly fascinating. I'd love to learn more about it. I love that Marilyn Monroe had stayed at the Overlook Hotel as well at one point. The whole wasps thing as well. I'm not really that scared of that whole scene either. It was fine. It was a scene. The hedge animals moving when Jack is outside, that was a little bit creepy. You know, like when I think the rabbit changes position. That is kind of creepy because you just don't know what exactly is going on. But it was when the hedge animals like actually came to life and started attacking Halloran later on, I was like, nah, not for me, unfortunately. Halloran, honestly, MVP. Loved Halloran. He was fantastic. The fact that he really didn't have any obligation to Danny, really. Like, to him, he was really just kind of a stranger. He could see that he had the Shining because, you know, Halloran also has that knack. But the fact that Halloran flew so many miles, braved a snowstorm himself, risked his life for this child who he met once. And he still tried to save him. What an absolute hero. Halloran was my favourite character in this book. He's probably my favourite character so far in the Stephen King books that I've read. Oh my god, he went the extra mile. He went so far for Danny. If it wasn't for him, like, who knows how it would have turned out. My heart was in my mouth when Jack attacked Halloran, because I couldn't remember if he survived or not after the first time reading this. I don't think he survives in the film, but in this one, he like gets him with a mallet, and I was like, oh my god, not Halloran, like please live. And he did, and he had the means to escape. Like he brought the snowmobile so that when the Overlook Hotel explodes, he could escape. He didn't really affect when Danny is talking to his dad, and I'm glad, because that was a heartbreaking moment where Danny realizes that this is what he has to do, and he has to like stand up to his dad on his own. And I found a little bit odd that Wendy was like, you know, Danny is with his dad and he must do this alone. I kind of found that weird, considering this entire book she's been fighting tooth and nail to protect Danny. The whole scenes with Wendy and Jack before this kind of proves that point, as Wendy's trying to get back to the room where she thinks Danny is, and you know, Jack has hit her with the mallet and stuff. Oh my god, that whole scene was so tense too. Wendy going down to check if Jack was still in the pantry. Well, she says that's Jack but not Jack, and he's like hitting her with the mallet and she's trying to get away from him. Oh my god, that was intense. That was terrifying. So as I said, the stuff with the naked lady, scary. From the point of Jack snapping to, I guess, the end, scary. In him chasing his wife and telling his son that he will bash his fucking brains in. Stuff like that is so messed up. It's so messed up. And you do kind of get a little bit of a here's Johnny moment with a mallet as Jack is smashing the door. He doesn't say here's Johnny or anything. He says something with a C word, which I'll not say because I'll get demonetized. The mallet smashing the bathroom door, knocking out a huge chunk of the thin paneling. Half of a crazed and working face stared in at her. The mouth and cheeks and throat were lathered in blood. The single eye she could see was tiny and piggish and glittering. Nowhere left to run, you. See you, Auntie. The kind of whole like eye coming through the door, like, hey, you're trapped kind of thing. Terrifying, honestly. And actually, yeah, if Halloran hadn't turned up, then Wendy probably would have died, because Halloran distracted Jack. So Jack was like, oh, someone else is here, I better go check that out. And so he did save Wendy at the last minute. So I do love the ending with the Overlook exploding, but it kind of dies like a pretty gruesome death too. In 217, the bathtub suddenly split in two, letting out a small flood of greenish, noxious smelling water. In the presidential suite, the wallpaper suddenly burst into flames. Like, you see little parts of the Overlook kind of dying on its own, like with the bathtub splitting and stuff like that. It just feels like a little bit of an agonizing death for the Overlook Hotel, which is what it deserves. So I really enjoyed the ending, and yeah, there was an epilogue too, which again indicates that Halloran and Danny have this incredible friendship. And yeah, that was very nice. Very, very nice. I don't know how you're going to react to this, but I'm going to give The Shining 3 stars. I don't think it's that scary personally. And I think maybe the reputation of this book kind of makes it harder for this book to actually scare people when it's being hailed as like one of the scariest books of all time and stuff like that. I guess it does depend on what you find scary, and maybe this is the scariest book to you, and I appreciate that so much. I'm so glad you do. I can see why it would scare a lot of people. The slow descent of madness that Jack has to endure and the danger it poses to his family is an incredible thing to explore, a terrifying thing to explore. Well, please don't hate me, this is not my favourite Stephen King book. I genuinely do not know how to talk about this book. Rage was incredibly weird, and I couldn't really find a whole lot online to explain a whole lot of the stuff that happens in this book. I'm struggling a little bit. So yeah, Rage is a book that is typically excluded from the Bachman books because Stephen King wanted the book to go out of print. And now I think there's like a couple of dogs barking in the neighborhood as well. See, this would have been perfect ambience for Cujo. Not right now. Now is not the time. Yeah, Stephen King let this story go out of publication, out of print, because it was kind of linked to a few school shootings. That is now said that Rage kind of like inspired a couple of those things. Now, I am the kind of person who thinks that if somebody is going to do something awful, they were always going to do it. Like, it was in them the entire time. And I wouldn't even really say that this is a school shooting book exactly. I would more say that the school shooting, it's more like a school hostage, or the hostage of a classroom of kids. And the shooting is just like the plot tool, the device to get these kids to talk about their problems and to talk about things that have embarrassed them or just like general kind of life stuff for them. But every single time I hear about this book being told, people tell me, oh, it's about a guy who goes on a rampage on a school shooting. And like, I have different ideas of that in my head because of that. And no, like, I will tell you what this is about. We do follow Charlie. Well, Charlie Decker, either or. And he gets his father's gun, he goes into school, he shoots his algebra teacher and holds his class hostage. He does shoot another teacher who like tries to like get in and get the kids out, and he shoots him too, and the two teachers have died. And now the majority of this book is just Charlie holding this class hostage and telling them to kind of share stories about themselves, whether it's to do with like their sex life or the times they've been bullied, their family stuff, their family drama and stuff. And we do see a lot of like Charlie's own kind of backstory there too. So there is no like rampage really. It's all very bubbled in, like all bubbled in on this classroom. And therefore the shooting aspect of this is secondary to these characters talking about themselves and getting a lot more backstory on them. So yeah, I went in this with totally different expectations, and like I still didn't really love this one or anything. I don't think it was like that great, but I do think, again, like all of the books so far, it's been very interesting to think about. And what Stephen King, or like Richard Bachman, I guess, although I think he wrote this before his pseudonym, like he wrote this as a teen or something, right? And I've heard like conflicting things about this as well, in terms of like Richard Bachman. So this is my first Richard Bachman book, and I was told that he started doing the pseudonym Richard Bachman because he didn't want people to know he was writing these books. But I heard another thing, that that's a lie, in that he was actually wanting to publish more than one book in a year, but the publishers didn't want to have too much like Stephen King in one year, and so he published other books under Richard Bachman so that he could publish more books. And it wasn't exactly a case of him trying to keep it secret, it was just the fact that he just wanted to publish more books. He was writing more books than the publishers could publish under his name. And that makes more sense to me because this is only his fourth book, essentially. And, you know, Carrie, Salem, Star, The Shining, I'm pretty sure those were massive, especially when the movies started coming out in the late 70s. I'm sure they were massive. But like, if this came out in 1977, he's only really been around for about 3 years in the publishing scene. So him trying to keep himself secret to say if people would buy his books that weren't under his name, that seems a bit weird to me, so I don't know if that's true or not. You'll have to let me know down below if you're a Stephen King expert. What is the truth there? What is the truth? And you can really tell this is Stephen King though. You can really tell when he goes back into talking about his parents and kind of informing us as readers on who he is as a character, Charlie. It really does feel like Stephen King. Like, it just has all of those Stephen King trademarks. And I don't know if it's because I literally just binge read 3 books in a row and then got to this one so I could see it straight away, essentially. I don't know if that has anything to factor into it. But yeah, this one, it's just, the plot just goes a little bit weird to me. I can't quite explain it. This story starts with Charlie being called in the principal's office to talk about an incident where Charlie almost killed a teacher, essentially. Like, he hit him with a pipe wrench, I think. Like, you get more on it like later on, but you do get a sense of Charlie's character pretty much straight away. The way that he talks back to the principal, the way that he talks back to like adult characters, you can see that he's really like pushing back the adult authority that tries to kind of like hold him down. There was one moment when he said he is sick of being masturbated on. Is like a sort of like metaphor that, you know, these adults around him are kind of just doing what they want to him. They have the control and they can do whatever they like. And I think Charlie now holding this class hostage is his way of regaining that control from the adults. And you have like the principal saying, oh, you know, it is the law, like I know what's best for you. And Charlie's like, you don't know what's best for me. You don't know shit, essentially. And you do get his desperate need to get control of his own life. And it seems like by doing that, he steals his father's pistol, which was incredibly easy to get, by the way, which I say this book, I know it was left to go out of print and that was Stephen King's decision after like so many links to different school shooters and how they had copies of the book in either their locker or their bedside table and they'd read it and stuff like that. I totally get that, but I can't help but see Rage as a critique on how easy it is for teenagers to get their hands on guns and how adults in a lot of situations don't pay enough attention to those kids who could potentially be school shooters, as well as how senseless it all is. Like when you get Charlie and he's talking about why he's doing it, he doesn't really explain why he's doing it. He even says at one point, if I knew why I was doing this, I probably wouldn't be doing it, kind of thing. So like I feel like that is Stephen King emphasizing how senseless something like this is. You even get other, you know, students in the classroom trying to chime in like, oh, it's your parents, you know, like this is to blame and stuff like that. And I found that so fascinating, trying to rationalize it when by the end of Rage, there is no rationality to it. There is no sense in it by the end of it. So again, I do feel like Stephen King was trying to critique that and not glorify it. That's what I personally think with Rage. I do think Stephen King had something to say with this book. I don't quite know what that is though, because I was left confused by the end of it. So if anyone can weigh in on the direction of the story, then please let me know. I'm going to do my absolute best to talk about, you know, these events and what I think. I do think it's trying to talk a lot about teenage control over their own lives. So when Charlie has the class hostage, he says, you tell them to remember who's driving. And so yeah, power, control, it does feel like that may be one of the reasons why he felt the need to do this. And it explains why only 2 teachers die in this story, because they are the adults. They are the only 2 people who could have jeopardized Charlie's plan of seizing control. Adults do a lot of the times take control over teens and children, for better or worse, and there is an argument to be had there where the adults know what's best and what they don't know what's best, kind of thing. And this feels like a way of Charlie challenging that. And throughout this book, I will say that I was like worried about what he would do, because it felt a little bit unhinged and unpredictable. But by the end of it, you realise the students weren't really in any danger, essentially, apart from one, Ted. And again, I need someone to explain this to me. But yeah, the entire time, the way the students act, one of them screams first and foremost. The others are like very quiet. And obviously everyone will have so many different responses to what's just happened. So Charlie just walk into the classroom. He's like being pulled out by the principal. He sets fire to his locker, comes back in the classroom, shoots Mrs. Underwood in the head, point blank. And that was so shocking. Like, it just happens so quickly. And then the students just like don't really have a whole lot of reaction apart from that one person who screams. I guess this could tie into like maybe some kind of themes of Stockholm syndrome, maybe like a lot of shock and like kind of, I don't know, there's, when you hear about like what they do later on, it's just, I don't know. But they do just like listen to Charlie, and when Charlie asks them to share details about themselves, was it Carol? I think Carol was talking about her sex life, for instance, which was so weird. It was so bizarre. And like it made me feel a little bit gross and icky. You just got like maybe a little bit too much information, a little bit too much detail there when it comes to the sex life stuff. But yeah, they're kind of like happy to share things about themselves. They're kind of happy to talk about their problems. And there was even one point when Irma, she goes to the bathroom and she just comes back. Like, she had every opportunity to go. Even Charlie says so many opportunities that they could have rushed him and they would have won. You know what I mean? But nobody does anything really. The only person who ever kind of challenges Charlie is Ted. And we'll talk about Ted in a second. But these kids, like, sometimes they're laughing at Charlie when he's talking on the intercom with the principal or like another teacher or another authority figure, and they're laughing with Charlie. Like, they kind of, like, there was one point when it said something like, they looked as if they were watching some kind of like exciting movie or something like that. And the students just weren't acting like the way I was expecting them to act at all. So it made me think that maybe this was a dream or some kind of thing was going on here. Maybe all of them were in on it in order to like kind of get out of school. I was kind of expecting at the end for all the kids to be like, hey, like, this was a great plan. We've got the rest of the school week off. Let's go to the beach or something. I don't know. But that's what I was kind of expecting. And yeah, there was even a moment as well when 2 female characters, one was Irma and there was not Carol, I don't think it was Carol, it was someone else, and like they're fighting one another, they're having like shots at each other, and Charlie's kind of like orchestrating the whole thing, and they're like happily kind of like punching each other and stuff. I'm like, what is this? And they're still willfully kind of going along with Charlie. Maybe like self-preservation, human preservation in front of like danger. But the thing that kind of breaks that theory is by the end of this, they turn on Ted. So Charlie's the one with the gun. Charlie's the one who's held them hostage this entire time. And then at the end of the story, all the kids in this class gang up on Ted and they pin him down and they spit on him and they kick him and they beat him and they stuff notepad paper in his mouth and like they get him into a comatose state, which you hear about in like one of the last chapters. They just turn on him, and like when Charlie's like, what have you all learned and stuff, Carol says, we have to help show Ted where he has gone wrong. And then that's when they all like kind of gang up on him and beat Ted. And Ted was the one who seemed like he would be the hero of the story. He would be the one to get the gun away from Charlie and he would save the day essentially. And yet all of like the victims of this hostage situation kind of turn on the supposed hero and incapacitate him. I'm like, what is going on here? So I kind of thought, oh, maybe like some kind of Stockholm syndrome thing. Maybe they had this like space where they were able to share their problems and their feelings without adults present, and it helped them. and Ted didn't really join in on that. Ted was the only one who kind of opposed it, and so they turned on Ted instead. I don't know. Like, I genuinely don't know. I would love to have a discussion about this with someone who has read this and kind of has an idea of that kind of angle to it, because I just don't know. I'm trying so hard to like dissect it as much as I can and understand. It's hard. It's a hard one. There is a moment when Charlie looks down at Mrs. Underwood's body and says this is a case of misplaced aggression, and it feels like a lot of it does have to do with his father. We have a lot of father problems, a lot of daddy issues, a lot of flashbacks, which is like the staple thing. I do feel like we almost spend a lot more time in the flashbacks, in the backstories of the characters, more so than we do in the present day, in like what's happening in this classroom. So I do think Stephen King is first and foremost trying to focus on the characters more than the actual plot of this story, because it is the characters who are going to be informing why everything's happening. But then I don't think you ever really discover why this is happening in the first place, which again could be the point. It could be the point Stephen King is trying to make, that violence like this is so senseless, and it's kind of his critique on that. It was tense the entire time through, because again, like, Charlie is very unpredictable and you don't know what he's about to do. And then it's kind of juxtaposed, like that tension is juxtaposed with Charlie himself, and I guess he's kind of treating it almost like a game. So when he's talking to one of the people on the intercom, it might be the principal at this point, and he's like, okay, you have to answer all these questions truthfully. Don't ask me questions. If you ask me a question, I'm going to shoot someone. If you lie on any of these questions, I'm going to shoot someone. And so like he has this rapid fire kind of chat that lasts about like 5 or 6 pages with the principal, and he keeps asking the principal, have you eaten your wife out? And he keeps asking like really weird random questions like that every now and then to try and throw him off. And when he gets him to, well, he does a trick thing where he gets the principal to give Charlie a question. Charlie shoots in the floor, even though he said he would shoot someone. What is his goal? Like, I think he goes into this knowing that he's not going to kill any of the students, and he even said at one point as well that he wasn't going to shoot Ted, even though there was a point when he looked like he was going to shoot Ted, but Charlie got shot instead. And the locker thingy-mabobby, the locker key lock key thing, saves Charlie, and the bullet like hits that instead of him, which is very convenient. It doesn't seem like Charlie was ever going to harm the students during the entire thing. So I feel like maybe this was just Charlie's way of giving power back to the kids in a really messed up, fucked up way. They end up going off at the end, doing their own thing. And I find that interesting, but I didn't fully like this book. I would only give it like 2 stars. I do think there is a huge conversation to be had around this. I actually find the notoriety of this book more fascinating than the book itself. Obviously, like the whole question of censorship and taking things out of print, because, you know, there were some people who, well, I mean, Stephen King said it best, I think. He said something like, you know, people who do these awful things were always going to do it. They always had like the kind of seed planted within them, but rage acted as a sort of accelerant. So it was kind of like watering the seed that was already there, and that is why the kids did what they did. I think there was 5 times when there was potentially a school shooting linked to rage, which I do totally understand why King was finally like, enough is enough, take this out of print. But I don't think rage should ever be to blame for any of that. Like, say for instance Scream, right? Scream has inspired, well, I say inspired loosely. I don't think anything really inspires anyone to act that way. When you think of how many people have watched Scream, like millions upon millions upon millions of people have watched Scream, and that hasn't made every single person go out and kill someone. You know what I mean? I think 2 teenagers, I think it was their best friend or something, like it was their female friend, and they killed her after watching Scream. I don't think Scream is to blame for that. I think what's to blame for that are those kids. Like, they have to take responsibility for their actions. And I wonder if maybe Stephen King's Rage was trying to examine that a little bit maybe. But this is only 149 pages. I don't think it was long enough to be able to fully explore anything like that. But it does show how senseless a lot of it is. Where do you put the blame? Can you put the blame on anyone else but yourself? It's obviously a very sensitive subject. And it is scary to think that some part of this book has spoken to people. But if anything, that part was always there. It was already there anyway. And I think maybe by taking Rage out of print, it's made it more desirable by people to read. Like, you feel this is like the banned book, even though it wasn't really banned. It was just like naturally taken out of print per the author's request. But it has this kind of level of mystery around it that I think entices a lot more people to it. It's such a tricky subject. It really, really is. I think you could talk about this for hours, just like every Stephen King book so far. But it is the most confusing one that I've read so far. I can't really fully explain it. and I didn't really fully enjoy it anyway. But hey, there had to be a book that comes bottom of the episode 1 ranking, and I'm so bloody glad at this point it's not going to be The Shining, because I feel like I will get so much hate for that. So every time I do one of these episodes, I'm going to post on my community page a poll of the 4 books I'm reading in that episode, and I'm going to get you guys to vote for which one's your favourite from that episode. And so I did the same thing with this episode. I put out a poll about a week ago, and I wanted to know what everyone's favourite book was that I was reading in this video. And I did this mainly because I want to compare it. I want to say if my ranking would be the same. I want to say if my favourite book would be the same as the majority that votes on the poll. And the more people who vote on these polls, the better, like the more results I will have. So I did get almost 4,000 votes on this one, which is fantastic. But yeah, The Shining won with 42%, and then Carrie came second with 29%, Salem's Lot came third with 25%, and then obviously Rage only had 4%. I didn't think this would be anyone's favourite book from this list, honestly. And the only thing that I would agree with this ranking is the fact that I will put Rage bottom 2. Rage is my 4th favourite in this video, my least favourite, and that pretty much goes without saying, honestly. But The Shining did win the poll, but it's unfortunately like my 3rd favourite from this video, or 2nd from the bottom. I just didn't love it as much as everyone else did, apparently. And hopefully I've explained exactly why during my Shining section, so that you guys don't hate me that much. And then Carrie is 2nd for me, and it came 2nd in the poll as well, to be fair, with 29%. So I feel like a lot of people do generally like Carrie. I don't really know that many people who like genuinely hate it, but no, this was a great book to start with, if you ask me. And then my favourite book was actually Salem's Lot, which came 3rd on the poll. And I guess I have a bit of a more unpopular opinion than everyone else, and it's been a few days now since I last read this, and it's kind of stuck with me since. I feel like the more I think about it, the more I like it. And who knows, you know, these ratings might change as the episodes go on. I might end up bumping some ratings up, bumping some ratings down, and you'll just have to keep an eye on like the leaderboard and what I give each book as I go along. Salem's Lot could potentially go higher upon a reread, upon reading other Stephen King books to get like more context in how I feel about his books. This was such a pleasant surprise. My first time reading it, and I ended up really loving it, actually. Potentially will bump this up to a 4.5 at some point, but today it's not that day. Leave a comment down below, let me know what your ranking of this episode would be of the books that I read. But the next episode, episode 2, will be coming in around about October. In that video, I will be reading The Stand. I know there were 2 different versions of The Stand. One of them was longer and I think published a bit later, but I'm just going to read The Stand. Like, this is the long version, so that's what's going to be read in the next episode. And then I'll be reading The Long Walk, which is another Richard Bachman book, and then I'll be reading The Dead Zone and also Firestarter in episode 2. The only book that I've read is The Stand. I don't even think I finished The Stand when I first read it, to be honest, because I genuinely cannot remember anything. So I pretty much will be reading all of these for the first time. And yeah, I'll post a poll on my community page a little bit closer to the time to find out what your favourite of the videos would be. My prediction is probably The Stand. I think you guys will probably vote The Stand. But yeah, I hope you stick around for more of my Stephen King adventures. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to leave this video a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you haven't already. Leave all your comments down below. Let me know your thoughts on all the Stephen King books that I read in this video. Just chat generally Stephen King with me. Just please be respectful as well that a lot of our opinions will be different, and I feel like every Stephen King reader is different to another Stephen King reader, so please be respectful down below. I would love that. But yeah, comment anything and everything. I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons for supporting my channel. If you'd like to join my Patreon, then the link is in the description box, as well as all of my socials. But yeah, that's it, and I hope I will see you in the next video. Bye.